You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. A lot of running around, but nevertheless, I'm looking forward to this show. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 256 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Previous episode was 255, an introduction of a new miniseries, The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. I had Officer Gary Mullins, a 16-year veteran of the Cleveland Police Department. And if you grew up watching Cops, as I did, he's the infamous one Cleveland police officer who shouted, "Get on it, Mel," in the lead up to perhaps the greatest pursuit in the show's history. So it was fun talking to Gary in a mini-series that I hope can continue to grow with time. It'll be fun talking to my next guest tonight for volume 41 of The Best, the Bravest. Of course, interviews with the FDNY's elite. He'll get introduced in a moment. He's a pretty interesting guy. And as I put in the promo for the show, where hasn't he worked? And I mean that in a good way. He's done a lot, and we'll talk about it. But first, of course, got to take care of business. Got to talk about our sponsors. One of them is an actual sponsor. The other one is just, of course, my consulting company, as always. If you don't know, now you know. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And things are picking up with that. It's a new endeavor, of course. It's weird to be 23 and running your own business, but hey, you only live once, so try at it, and so far, so good. So from that, we go to an actual sponsor now, and that is Joe Murray. If you're ever caught on the wrong end of the law, call Joe Murray. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer turned criminal defense attorney. With 15 years of experience in the NYPD from 1987 until 2002, he parlayed a successful career in the NYPD into an equally successful career as a criminal defense attorney. His website is jmurray-law.com, where you can reach him at 646-838-1702, or just email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. Joe Murray, of course, a big supporter of this show, and I appreciate his support as always. All right, sponsors taken care of. Thank you very much to Joe. My next guest has a varied and extensive background in emergency management, his training grounds being the concrete streets of New York City, a member of the old New York City EMS pre its 1996 merge with the FDNY. And upon the merger would continue his ascent. Of course, he finished up in 2000 with the FDNY as a deputy chief on the EMS side, where his citywide duties included leading as a deputy borough commander in the Bronx, Queens, and Manhattan, and a commander in the Special Operations Division. He's part of a team that helped create the FDNY EMS Hazards Tactical Patrol Unit and was a charter member of New York City's Office of Emergency Management upon its formation in 1996. He's got his own podcast, which is pretty popular, and I, for one, love listening to, and we'll talk about it tonight. 5 Minutes to Chaos, the podcast, of course, as it's called, which is available on Apple, Spotify, anywhere that you get your podcast, which chronicles not only his experience in emergency management, but also those that he came into contact with, and he tells their stories and does a great job of interviewing them. And that, for this volume 41 of The Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite, is retired FDNY EMS deputy chief and podcaster, Steve Kuhr. Steve, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing great.
Great to have you. Before we begin, we do want to make note, it's a little bit somber, but we do have to talk about it. And that is New York City emergency management community has lost a giant today, someone you knew very well. I never got the chance to know him on a personal level, but I certainly know of him. And that is Jerry Hauer, who's pictured to the right in this photo of Mayor Giuliani. If you're watching on YouTube, it's to your left. And unfortunately, this man who had a lot to do with the evolution of emergency response in the 5 boroughs passed away today. And I know you wanted to share some brief thoughts on him.
Yeah, I think it's important that if we're going to have an episode talking about public safety in New York City, as your show is, it's important that we mention Jerry Hauer, and I think this will become a little bit of a shock to a number of the listeners who are close with Jerry. Jerry Hauer passed away this morning after suffering from an illness for the last few months. Jerry was not only the founding member of New York City Emergency Management when Mayor Giuliani created the office. He was also to me, a close personal friend. He was my mentor in emergency management. Everything emergency management passed through Jerry, and the way I learned to operate and the way I continue to operate. And he is absolutely the godfather of certainly urban area emergency management. The program that Jerry built was exported to urban areas, to cities throughout the country, in particular, some of the terrorism response protocols, bioterrorism, chemical terrorism, et cetera. My heart goes out to his wife, Tracy, and his son, Michael, tonight.
Absolutely, and I second those thoughts. We like to dedicate this show to his memory. Again, a giant in the emergency management community, not just in the 5 boroughs, but everywhere. It's hard not to know the name Jerry Howard. A good man, left behind a great legacy, and he'll certainly be missed. And thank you for sharing some thoughts on him. I know it's tough because, like I said, you guys were very close.
Thank you, Mike.
I appreciate that. Quick shout out to everyone in the chat. Bill Ryan, retired NYPD arson explosion squad detective and co-executive producer and creator of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles the NYPD's arson explosion and bomb squad. He says, hello, everyone. He's a member of the Repeat Offenders Club on my YouTube channel. I appreciate that. The Truth is here. Steve Iarato and Pat Bogan out of the Emergency Service Unit, retired NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force detective, but for a long time an E-Man in Truck 2. He says, hello, all. Hi, Mike. Hi, Steve. One of the best in the business.
Pat was an EMS lieutenant before he went over
to
the NYPD. Got to make that note because Pat and I go back many, many years. And when I was chief uptown, he was on 2 truck and he used to come by the station and we used to, we used to get our coffee going.
Yeah, no, of course. Pat, great guy. And on top of that, it is true, he was in New York City EMS. And on top of that, he had a role in hazmat too on the ESU side. And we could talk about that. For sure as we go tonight, because I know you had a role in that on the EMS side as well. Mark Peck's watching, the Ageless Wonder, and he says, hi, Steve. So good to see you, Mark, and hopefully I can get you on the show.
Another mentor, quite frankly, another mentor in paramedicine, another godfather in public safety in New York City.
Absolutely. Goes without saying. So as we were talking about off the air, we could talk about it now because I want to hear these stories for the first time, and I will. Child of Brooklyn, and you did a lot early on in public service, but tell me first about growing up around, I imagine, civil servants in both FD and PD.
Well, so my dad drove a truck for Schaefer Beer, which is over on Kent Avenue. So for those Brooklynites that know the area, the 90 precinct up in right near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I grew up driving, sitting on his lap, driving a forklift around the brewery on Sundays, but we're not going to tell anybody in management over there that I did that, and that's something that we did. And I grew up around the time, before even that, I did some time with the New York City Police Department Auxiliary Police Emergency Service Unit out of Brooklyn. 70 precinct had there were ESU units in different precincts throughout the city. There was a 6-1 squad, there was a 70 squad, and I was attached to the 70 squad. Basically, we ran medical runs at a time where EMS resources were kind of scant. I'm in the 70s now. I was probably still a high school student, but I went through the NYPD Auxiliary Police Academy, got certified, qualified, and joined the after some foot patrol stuff. Did join the emergency services. I was also part of volunteer ambulance squad in Brooklyn, Shorefront Volunteer Ambulance down in the South Brooklyn area, covering places like Sheepshead Bay, Brighton Beach, Coney Island, etc. And these are some of the places I cut my teeth as a young person. My volley service brought me to the scene of the Walbaum's fire that recently we had the 45th anniversary, I believe, where 6 firefighters were killed. I was an employee of Walbaum's at another store, and they cut me loose, and I went over there with my volley credentials and gave it best assistance that I could at the time.
And we'll get into what exactly prompted the interest momentarily, but it's funny because I knew the NYPD had an auxiliary emergency service unit. I just wasn't sure what they did, but you answered it there because I'm like, well, what are they doing that ESU isn't already doing? But it's true. Medical runs were important back then.
Medical runs. We had some extrication equipment. I'm not quite sure we had a Hearst tool, but we had come-alongs and other mechanical tools that we could do auto extrication with. But it was primarily medical runs.
Nice. So, of course, again, that leads into the question. is there anyone or anything specific that made you say, sometimes it's a television show, I should say, sometimes it's someone in the neighborhood that makes you develop that bug, that itch, if you will, to say, I want to do that when I grow up?
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. 1972, the show Emergency hits the screen. Johnny and Roy running around Los Angeles County in this really hot red rescue squad, running medical runs for the most part and doing some rescue work as well. And the first time I had heard the word paramedic, and that's the first time I think the country heard the word paramedic. We had paramedic programs around that same time starting to pop up in New York City, New York Hospital, St. Vincent's. Mark Peck is probably shaking his head saying, "No, I got the timing wrong." But around the same time, these programs were building. So I was grateful to have the opportunity to do just that.
So that brings us into 1980, of course, getting into New York City EMS. Although, actually, you know what? Let's go back a second, because you mentioned the wall bulbs fire, and I shouldn't gloss over that. That was a seminal moment in the FDNY's history, one of the more tragic incidents they had of course, September 11th, 2001. And that day, 6 firemen, I believe. Was it 6 or was it 12?
It was 6 firefighters, and just a
6.
side note, Harold Hastings was one of the firefighters that perished that day. I was fortunate enough to work with his son, NYPD detective Brian Hastings, years later at OEM, and I hope if Brian's listening, he knows that he has my deepest respect.
So responding that day, when did you get down there, and what was your exact role?
So Walbaum's fire. So I was an employee of Walbaum's, and I was a teenager. I was sweeping the parking lot, and sanitation broom, as they call them, a broom came by, and he said, "Hey kid, let me take care of that for you." Did the whole parking lot for me. He says, "By the way, you know, your other store is on fire." And he showed me with it, and I could see the smoke. So I was on Avenue Z in McDonald, and of course the Walbaum store was on Ocean Avenue in Forey, so you could see a good plume of smoke. So I had a car. I jumped in a car. I went down there with my first aid kit and my volley squad and my Red Cross certification, and I went up to the EMS area. The MERV was there, right? The major emergency response vehicle was there, multiple EMS units. They were directing operations. Firefighters were being treated on the MERV. I didn't never really treated anybody, but I was available, and some of the EMS guys over there knew me. By then, I knew Mark Peck, and I knew Lieutenant Robert Becker ultimately became chief of EMS, and I believe he was the incident commander, if memory serves. So I had some visibility, but I was available.
Right. But even then, even if you didn't have a specific hand intending to anyone on a deep level, it's still a shocking sight to see early on. And that could test someone's resolve when you're seeing so much chaos and you're ultimately seeing so much death. It's bad enough to lose one first responder, but 6 in one incident like that is truly heartbreaking, and you can't ever encapsulate that. But there's other situations where instead of weakening one's resolve, it strengthens it. It strengthens you to want to continue. And clearly that was the case with you. It didn't, take away from what you wanted to do. It made you want to do it even more so.
Absolutely correct. In fact, not too far from there, or maybe right in front of the store, was an incident that really taught me uh, emergency management. There was a bus accident, and I was a senior paramedic on the scene. Supervisor, gentleman by the name of Mike Rice, who left us recently, rest in peace, Mike. He was a district supervisor. He was out of the area, and so there was no supervisor on the scene. We had a number of patients, and I was a paramedic, and we triage, treated, and transported the patient. But the incident was disorganized, and when I got back to the station, he got back from a meeting he was at headquarters. I got called on the carpet. It was like, you dropped the ball. And I didn't get read the riot act, but I was instructed on what my job was supposed to be. We very infrequently had to serve as like medical commanders because we had supervisors, but I forgot that my role as senior paramedic was to be in charge, and never let that happen again. And I was given the instruction I needed to do better, and of course I did.
Of course, talking with Steve Kuhr. This is volume 41 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Also do want to mention the super chats there. If you want to contribute there tonight, you're more than welcome to. If you got a question, of course, you can slip it in there, and I'll try to get to it at the appropriate time in this interview. So 1980, when you're coming on, this was not too far removed from the Ford to city drop dead era. The city is broke. The city's in an economic crisis. And at this time, there's a lot to choose from civil service wise. If you want to go the police route, you got the NYPD, you have the New York City Transit Police, you have the New York City Housing Police. or if you want to go to the FD route, obviously the FDNY. And you ended up in New York City EMS. Not that I'm knocking it, important agency, but one that, even in an economic downturn for the city at that time, did not have nearly the same amount of resources as any of the other aforementioned agencies, especially NYPD, FDNY. So, I imagine you were quite familiar with the makeup at that time. It seems like you were really a student of the game and still are. So was there a hesitance, or did it not matter to you? Were you eager just to get out there and do whatever you could to help?
I grew up in a blue collar family, so the options at the time were shape up on a loading dock. Could have been Schaefer beer, could have been some other labor job, or get a civil service job. I actually took the NYPD exam. I wasn't really interested in becoming a cop. I really had a passion for paramedicine, and from the time I saw the show Emergency, which would have been 8 years earlier, and now I've grown up through high school, and now I'm ready to get into the workforce or go to college. I chose EMS. I chose EMS because I knew I could be. I had already become an EMT. In fact, there was such a shortage of EMTs at the time. EMS was offering free EMT training to those that would apply to jobs down the line. I was fortunate enough to get in that program and bring some friends with me, actually. And then I was selected for the EMS Academy shortly thereafter. So my EMT card actually is dated 79, and then I went to the Academy in 80.
And tell me what that academy was like.
So it was nothing like it is today. It was, I think, about 3 weeks. It was at the Queens General Hospital campus over there on off 164th Street, Grand Central Parkway, and it was there was EVOC part of it. Whatever EVOC was in 1980, it was safety training, driver training, driving the ambulance under emergency conditions. Sort of a mini refresher of EMT course, mini EMT course refresher, and going through the protocols. There was the operating manual, and it was this little yellow and orange and white handbook. It was nothing big. It was this little manual that had some of the rules of the road, if you were, that covered on-scene operations, and that's pretty much what it was. And I graduated. Those that are listening in public safety remember the all green uniforms. So I wore a green shirt with green pants and a light green stripe, and I was an ambulance corpsman. That was my job title, ambulance corpsman.
And that specifically was, well, obviously the NYPD and FDNY follow a paramilitary structure. Is that what EMS was doing at the time too, with the position like corpsman?
Most likely. I've given that some thought. Some of the more senior guys like Mark Peck can probably answer that better than I can, because at one point paramedics also were called, I think, paramedic ambulance corpsmen. So I think they stuck with that title. But we did have a paramilitary structure, so this is not far from the end of the Vietnam era. The green uniforms were, I think, a way to differentiate EMS from the other public safety agencies. The London Ambulance Service guys wore green, a very similar color, and still do. And so we had lieutenants, captains, we had chiefs. We had a fairly standard structure that way.
Interesting enough. Where were you first stationed? Because, of course, there's 5 different boroughs in which you could be. Were you put in Brooklyn, or where were you put originally on the academy?
That's a great question. So I was assigned to Station 33, which probably has a different name now, a battalion number, and that's would have been the garage, as we called it, at Kings County Hospital. And this is literally a garage where they fed the horse that drew the ambulances many years before, but it was a 2-level garage. There was an elevator that you could lift ambulances up to the 2nd level. And we did. We parked ambulances up there. The elevator was always in disrepair, but it was a pretty big garage. And this was central Brooklyn. We covered a significant amount of the borough from there. So there were BLS units, that's basic life support units. There were very few paramedic units. In fact, there would have been 1 paramedic unit covering the central Brooklyn area, And then shortly thereafter, there would be one covering the North Brooklyn area. That would become 3-3 Willie and 3-6 Willie, respectively.
And again, there's a lot going on during this time because, I mean, unfortunately, I think, and this is said lovingly, but the circumstances were such at the time that's what makes it unfortunate, that some of the best EMTs and paramedics in New York City's history worked during that era, where unfortunately, because of the high crime, a lot of shootings, a lot of stabbings, and certainly not in every part of the city, but in certain parts of Brooklyn, you're seeing quite a bit of that, especially as drugs enter the fold. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, with crack and AIDS and whatnot.
It's an interesting point you make, because when I became a paramedic and I was assigned to what was called Liberty Outpost, it was an outpost. I love the terminology. Station 34 is on Liberty and Miller in the East New York area. The 7-5 precinct, as memory serves, had the highest gun crime and firearm death data of any police district in the country at the time. Mm-hmm. So when I rolled out, and I worked evenings and overnights. So when we rolled out at 1600, 1700, it was trauma most of the night.
Oh, yeah. And well, the motto of that precinct, as I've covered many a time with alumni from that precinct, is you give us 22 minutes, we'll give you a homicide.
That's about right.
Yeah. So that was for that era. And still, it's pretty rocking now, but especially back then, 80s and 90s. And I think 7 Truck ESU is out of that precinct too. So those guys are quite busy over there in that section. And of course, crack comes into the fold a few years later, which is adding even more chaos on top of an already chaotic time. So working during that era where you're seeing the damage firsthand it's doing to people, tell me about that. That must have been pretty wild, even for someone that by this point, you're pretty seasoned. You've been in the game a while, but this is something entirely new.
So it's interesting you say that, because some of us can gauge our service based on different drugs that were on the streets, or different type of runs that we responded to, or different diseases that were out there, like AIDS. When I first hit the streets as a paramedic, heroin was king. Heroin was everywhere. There was no such thing as fentanyl. We would respond to numerous heroin ODs, and we were the only ones that could give Narcan at the time. Even in 1981, 82, we had Narcan, and Narcan was really a life-saving drug. Of all the things we carried, if it's called naloxone, which is the medical name, and then the trade name is Narcan. But I mean, the abusers, drug abusers, or I shouldn't call them that, probably drug overdose victims, they wake right up. They go from not breathing, blue as a Smurf, to breathing, and it can be violent because you kind of ruin their highs, so to speak.
Yeah, and I've seen that, to say the least, in certain YouTube videos, and it does break your heart to where someone just saved your life and temporarily reminded you you're in a tailspin, but you're in so much of a tailspin you can't even realize that.
Yeah, we wouldn't hit them with the ones that were not breathing. We typically wouldn't hit with Narcan. That quantity of Narcan, unless we had it PD on the scene, or BLS backup unit, so we could, restrain is probably a strong word, but at least help them out of their high. And then we did transition into the crack era. And, we didn't have an antidote for that, so that was just an interesting time of victims exhibiting extreme behaviors and stuff like that.
What tours were you normally working back then? Were you on days? Were you on nights? Did EMS have 24s back then, or no?
No 24s. We worked 8-hour shifts. I mean, we were just too busy. We would turn out and do 8, 10, 12 runs. Not every run had a patient. Some were unfounded. Some were canceled. Radio card, get on a scene and, cancel the bus kind of thing. But I worked predominantly evenings I worked predominantly evenings in the beginning, and then steady midnights for years.
Yeah, I imagine what that must have been like. And did you move around? I know you started out in Brooklyn. I know you would move around later, but when did you first, let me rephrase that question. When did you first shift from Brooklyn to another borough?
Well, when I became chief, actually. So I went from the boroughs to special operations. So I was, even as a lieutenant, I was in Brooklyn. So I was promoted to lieutenant, civil service process, took an exam, and I was assigned back to Station 33, Kings County. I worked steady midnights there, turning the units out, running field response out of Kings County. And somewhere around, let's say 85, the agency, the chief of EMS, and a small group of leaders that recognized the fact that we needed better mousetrap responding to disasters and major emergencies, created a group called the Special Operations Division. And I was fortunate enough to go in there as a lieutenant and be trained as a citywide special operations supervisor, which entailed weeks of training before they'd cut you loose. I rode with senior officers, senior SOD officers, Bobby Anarelli, rest in peace. He became a ranking chief. He was citywide tour commander at fire department after the merger. Pedro Carasquillo, John Lazaro, especially John was the captain at the time, many others.
So being in that supervisory role, I mean, first things first, before we even get to citywide, now you're moving into that role. And I always love covering this with anybody that I interview from the police or the fire department. In that now it's not just about you. Granted, it's not to say that when you were just simply a medic at that time, you weren't thinking about your teammates. Of course you are. It's not just, of course, your own safety that you have in mind. It's theirs too. But from a supervisor standpoint, that gets heightened. And you mentioned it, you touched on it, by riding around with these guys. I imagine you were, even if they weren't feeding you lines directly, just seeing how they carried themselves, you were extracting things. Okay, this is how I want to be as a supervisor. These are the details I want to take so that I can be the best supervisor I know I can.
EMS was in a transition at that time, and the new leadership were cultivating good leaders across the boroughs. So the chief was appointing good borough commanders, good division commanders like communications, et cetera. And the role models were improving, and there was better role models for young guys like myself to learn from. It was also an opportunity to take myself with all the passion I had to do a good job with the learning I had from that bus accident probably a couple of years before, and know that I had to do a better job. And yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. Because you're not only supervising your own people, but at a major incident, you're also coordinating with the other agencies. There comes a time where the fire might be under control, but you still have a lot of patients to treat. And we're not merged with FD at the time, but FDNY was always supportive if I went and asked for help.
Yeah,
ESU. In fact, I got a Patty Pogan story we could tell.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So I'm captain in SOD, and I think the year is 1990, and we have a raging snowstorm, and we get I log on. I parked my vehicle at the city line. I lived on Long Island. I parked my car at the EMS Academy, which is in Fort Totten, Queens. I log on. They transmit the signal for, so similar terminology. FDNY transmits the box. We have a signal. I think a railroad accident is at 10:31 or something. They transmit the signal for a major train accident, court in Joralemon, downtown Brooklyn. So it takes me a while to get there. We have a subway explosion. Snow got caught under the third rail. The subway, the third rail explodes. The subway car is filled with smoke and fire. 2 fatalities, about 200 patients. And so I have multiple sectors operating. We have a unified command post going there on Court Street. I call for mutual aid from New Jersey. We had mutual aid plans. I called for Jersey City EMS to send mutual aid. Patty Pogan shows up at the command post and says, "How could I help?" And I assigned Patty a sector because we knew each other. This is how it works in emergency services. I didn't have to think about it. Patty was going to go take care of it. Patty took care, treated, and cleared about 35 or 40 victims. And that was a sector that I didn't have to worry about because I had competent medical authority dealing with it. It wasn't an interagency conflict like we so often hear. It was total interagency support. And that's the way it absolutely should work.
And I'm seeing that now in my job currently with the West Haven Fire Department, because that's how we operate. Where, for those of you that don't know, West Haven, Connecticut, we have 3 separate fire districts. We have my district where I work in, which is the Center District. We have the Allentown District and the West Shore District. If any one of those districts gets a fire, it's automatic mutual aid. So we'll send our personnel, the other district will send their personnel, and we'll all 3 go to that fire. Yeah. And I remember a story that Bob Masucci, another ESU cop who worked on Truck 1 for many, many years, told me, where literally building collapsed in Jersey. think it was Jersey City. This is in the 90s. And he goes down there as an ESU cop on mutual aid. And a sea of firemen in Jersey City is orchestrating the rescue of someone from that collapse. And it wasn't, hey, fireman cop thing, like you said. More times often than not, we see that interagency collaboration. We see that partnership to where, pride in agency or not, you recognize, hey, this guy or this gal knows what he or she is doing. I ought to trust them.
I have another similar story with fire department. I was midnight boss out of Kings County. I get dispatched to a structure fire over on Church Avenue, somewhere in the East 40s, and I get on the scene, and we have a basement fire. I don't think it was more than an all hands fire, but the truck companies were bringing patient after patient after patient out. Ultimately, 11 people in cardiac arrest. I had them laid out on the street. I think it was 49th Street. I worked with the battalion chief. We had all of them. We had CPR in progress. I called for paramedic and BLS units, and we set up a staging area on Church and I think again 49th. And it was a beautiful thing seeing firefighters doing CPR along with EMS personnel, but really the EMS personnel needed to transport. So we would load and go on the BLS units, one or two, depending on the status of the victim. Paramedic units were working the victim on scene. And it was just beautiful interagency cooperation. In another scenario, 11 cardiac arrests typically get triaged as black tags or DOAs because you just don't have the resources. I had plenty of resources, right? We had a fire, had probably been declared under control. There was no more smoke. The victims were out on the street. Firefighters are trained in CPR. EMS and the fire department working together. It's just how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at I love how you talk about the resources. When you combine the powers, and you see this a lot with USAR, right? USAR Task Force 1 in New York is comprised of emergency service cops as well as FDNY firefighters, and I think a few EMS personnel too, but primarily ESU and FDNY guys. And guys on both sides of the aisle have told me, whatever conflicts we've had in the past, when we combine our forces, we're unstoppable. Because in that moment, it's all about one thing. It's not about who's the superior agency. That can be solved on the baseball field or on the hockey rink. It's about helping people. And the one thing, no matter what agency you work for, you all share in common is you want to help people. And if they're on the verge of dying, you want to make sure they live to see another day.
I learned interagency collaboration early, and I took that to me with OEM. And I'd like to think almost 23 years after 9/11, and just 27 years after I left New York City OEM, the agencies work wonderfully together. Of course, no place is a panacea, but we have so much rich history where we work together and support each other. But I took those skills to OEM because as deputy commissioner for planning, my job is to build emergency plans and do exercises. And there was a time where there was conflicts, who was going to get what asset, who was going to get which responsibility. And there would be multiple session planning meetings where we had to negotiate solutions. And, we had some, unfortunately, some members of these planning teams like Jack Fanning and Ray Downey that would succumb to 9/11, to the 9/11 attack years later. But we had, equally important representation, Jay Copstein, et cetera, on the NYPD side. And we would sit in meetings and we would negotiate stuff.
No, it's important to get all those perspectives mixed in. Let's talk about special operations for a moment, because Zach touched on it when he was on last summer, as a matter of fact, and we can expand on it a little bit here. And I've seen some of the photos you were starting. I mean, I think you guys took some old NYPD ESU Atom cars and converted them, and they actually look really nice. I ought to pull up a picture. I'm going to try to.
Well, we actually bought those new.
Oh, okay, even better, because they look like Atom cars. So that's why
that's exactly what they were. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So, being able to utilize those vehicles, again, people don't realize when you think of MCIs in New York City, it's not always the major thing that makes the news. It's still a major event. It just might not get the same coverage if it happens in a certain place, like the crane collapse in Midtown the other day. Of course, that's going to make the news. But these incidents are happening pretty much all the time, or at least back then they were happening with great frequency in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in Staten Island, certain parts of Manhattan that might not be as famous. and you're going to them. And it's important to have an SOD. I mean, yes, the FDNY does have SOC, the NYPD has its own SOD as well. But EMS, I felt, as the 90s came into play and things were evolving, especially as more MCIs that were covered heavily came down the road, EMS was evolving with the times, and having an SOD that was that beefed up was a real big asset.
So as Zach spoke about on his episode, he and a small team developed what was called the Emergency Medical Action Plan, EMAP. EMAP is still in place today, as far as I know, in the FDNY. It was really the first attempt at organizing multiple casualty incident response under the fairly new incident command system. Right. So this is the early 80s. ICS officially hit the street in 1970 under the Los Angeles Fire Scope program. And Zach was keen enough to research and find this program and apply the Fire Scope's operating model for wildfires. Really, it wasn't even designed for structure fires, to a medical emergency response. So that's the beginning of improved major incident response on the medical side in New York City. Chief Robert Becker, with the assistance of Chief Jim McNally, another senior chief in EMS who's since left us, rest in peace, and Zach, created the Special Operations Division. It was actually originally called the Operations Patrol Unit. Zach's got a smile on his face now that I said that. And the OPU originally became the Special Operations Division. Before the REPs were purchased, our job was just to turn out as supervisors. We're specially trained and just go to major emergencies all day. What a great job that was. Could you imagine what like a 28-year-old guy, specially trained, running around the city, bumping into rescue, bumping into ESU. And that was really also the beginning of my evolution as a career emergency manager, because I made it my business to understand fireground operations. I made it my business to understand emergency service operations, law enforcement operations, and we would. So I knew they were called the U supervisor, ESU supervisors, right? So there was ESU 4 and 5, City South, City North. Yeah. Bob Swanson was one of them. We all knew each other. And the FDNY at the time had a unit called Safety Liaison. A captain would roll out, and we would set up a liaison and force the agencies to create this unified command post. This is at a time where it didn't really happen that easily. We made it happen. Later on, the technical service unit was merged into my group, and that was where the REPs came. We had trucks with generators to provide scene lighting for major emergencies. We had some hazmat gear to do the decon operations, because under an agreement with a citywide agreement at the time, FDNY, NYPD, and EMS entered into an agreement where we would all have a different role at hazmat. Our role was what was called in the agreement medical decon, and we had a shower truck, and we had some of those large rescue-looking vehicles and the small REPs to meet that task. And we would go to jobs with at the time hazmat or ESU. ESU had a shower truck also. It was housed at Floyd Bennett Field,
as was all the rest of their SOD equipment, of course, when they purchased it from the Coast Guard. And you mentioning U4, that reminds me on a separate note, Patty, if you're still in the chat, and I believe you are, one of the U4 cars in the 90s was Lieutenant Bob Sobochinsky, who, for those of you that watched Cops growing up, he was in quite a few episodes when they filmed with the NYPD. If you talk to Sobo, Pat, please give him my information, because I've been trying to get him on the show for quite a while. So just a little side there that you reminded me of. And again, I like that, because you get the best of both worlds. You get that cross collaboration too. I mean, look at what Rescue 1 on the FDNY side is doing. Look at what Rescue 2 is doing. Each rescue in each borough has different types of responses to different types of emergencies. But by being able to go citywide and not being limited to a borough, you get that flavor. And as a result, you can kind of become an emergency management chameleon. No matter what the situation is, you can blend in and you can be an asset.
That's absolutely true. And that's what gave me the skill set I needed to do interagency coordination in a grander scale, in an emergency management sense. But, it was all, personality based. We would respond to these major incidents, and I knew Patty, and I knew the ESU supervisors, and I knew the rescue company officer and the safety liaison captains, and that's how we got stuff done.
And I wanted to, speaking of the evolution of MCIs in the 90s, real quick. 1992, we get a really bad nor'easter that particularly devastates Queens, and Queens was flooded for a while. Any role in that?
1992, I would have been a chief in. So that was one of three storms of the century. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, but that's what the media called it. So there was 92, 93, and I think 96. I know the storm you're talking about. So I was deputy chief uptown, and we had water. The East River came up and met Third Avenue, and we had limited egress and access to the hospitals on the east side, northeast in particular. So Metropolitan Hospital, Harlem Hospital, the hospitals that were more center borough or more on the west side weren't impacted. But we had some impact turning units out because of the flooding. So that was, so I was not with OEM. There was no OEM yet, not the mayor's office of OEM. That was the NYPD OEM.
Okay. Yeah, that was a heavy rainstorm, particularly. It wasn't so much snow. And there's iconic photos of emergency vehicles trying to trudge through that with heavy floodwaters. Yep, December 11th of 1992 is what Steve Irato put in the chat. And that was a pretty bad one. And it gets dwarfed because 2 months after that, February 26, 1993, Tim Farrell and I talked about it a couple episodes ago, his response to that, So
Yep.
That day, and Zach talked about it when he was on as well, that day, I mean, this is emergencies times 10. It's nothing like the city had ever seen before. Had there been bombings? Yes. Had there been large-scale fires as a result of bombings in the city? Yes. But here is something where your most notable landmark is essentially turned into the world's biggest chimney. And not just one, two. And you got 6 fatalities. And you have people that are trapped 110 stories up. If you weren't involved that day, that's fine. But if you were in any capacity, at least in the days afterwards, tell me about trying to handle something that nobody had ever handled before.
So I was involved. I was in paramedic refresher. So every year at the time, paramedics had to refresh and go through this month-long training, take the state exam. So when the job hit 200 patients, the citywide tour commander contacted me and said, he knew where I was. He said, "Could you grab some supervisors and head out to the scene? This thing is growing. It's becoming pretty big crisis." So I grabbed. I was deputy chief. I grabbed a captain and 2 lieutenants. They were in training with me, and we responded into the city. I assumed a position on the incident command team. My role was to coordinate mutual aid from EMS resources from outside the city. So that was my first role. So I coordinated. We had EMS units coming from as far out as Pennsylvania. We had Connecticut, Jersey, and my role was to receive them, catalog them, and deploy them in for patient care and transport. I worked with our medical director, Dr. Lorraine Giordano at the time, who gave, she was on scene. She gave orders for how all paramedics should operate using disparate paramedic protocols, because we all come with our own organic paramedic protocols. So she standardized how that should work. And my job was notify these EMS crews as they came in. My second role was to coordinate the dispatch of EMS supervisors to all hospitals throughout the city to get patient pedigrees, because after some people left the scene, they self-referred to hospitals for medical care. They didn't realize that they weren't feeling well. And that's where we get the number 1092 from the supervisors that I coordinated to go to the hospitals throughout the city.
And it's not just those people that were trapped on the floors above, I should say, and of course you have the casualties and trying to remove them from the scene respectfully, and that came with time. But in the midst of all this, Kevin Shea from Rescue One suffered a catastrophic fall in which he was very fortunate to survive. And even if you weren't directly involved in trying to remove him, his fellow firemen were fortunately able to do that, and he lived to be able to tell the tale. Still, now you're worried about a downed firefighter. I'm sure you got one eyeball on that corner too. So in a situation like that, where there's so much happening all at once, and there's that iconic photo of all those emergency vehicles congregated in front of the towers, how is a commander, and you talked about it recently with Phil Parr, on an episode of 5 Minutes to Chaos. But I'll allow you to expand on it here on this program. How is a commander able to centralize and focus on what's going on without losing focus? Not necessarily panicking, but losing concentration.
Well, first thing, that photo you're talking about, I'm going to ask you a question. What's missing from that photo?
A means of an egress?
Well, what's missing are EMS units
Ah.
because of our incident command system that we had put in place. And Zach may have spoken about this on the episode he did for my podcast, definitely yours, because we staged units outside the hazard zone. We didn't have EMS units. We didn't have to worry about loading them and moving apparatus. Because in the past, you'd have to move an engine, move a truck, move a rescue, move a squad, move an ESU truck to get. So the EMS units were all staged outside the hazard zone. So they were able to have egress. So you called it on egress, but look at the photo again. You won't see EMS units in there. So to answer your question, how to get a strategic view, it's really about span of control. And we had pre-plans for the World Trade Center. So no pun intended, but our pre-plans were blown up, literally, because our written pre-plan, which we had used many times for all hands fires, 1076, high-rise fires, routines. I mean, no fire is routine, but we had fires in the World Trade Center, Box 8082. We would go down into the Port Authority police desk, it was called. It was their police station. That was where we would set up interagency operations, EMS commander, fire incident commander, Port Authority police, etc. That was literally blown up that day. The plan was blown up. The office was blown up and it didn't exist. So that had to be, I wasn't part of that part of the operation, but we had to do is be adaptable. You need to be nimble and figure out another place to do interagency operations. And that was done up on West Street. But again, to your question, it's about span of control. It's about having trained people, the right people in the right place to give you that strategic view, to create that situational awareness so you can inform command decisions.
And it paves the way in general. And let's say 9/11 doesn't happen. Still, a situation like that and the response to it and what went right and maybe what didn't go so right paves the way for how you respond to future emergencies. And certainly it influences how one might respond to terrorist incidents. There was game plans, I'm sure, for those types of incidents. But as you said, things maybe had to be modified after something like this. And even a year later, let's look at December of 1994, another MCI, and you were a chief for this at the time, even if you didn't respond directly. I'm sure there were conversations about it afterwards, when Edward Leary detonated that firebomb on the 4 train down on Fulton Street, which injured numerous people, over 40. Didn't kill anybody miraculously, but something like that. Again, game planning.
So I was there. I responded from Rockaway. I was chief in Queens. And by the time I got there, the incident was starting to stabilize. But that's an important incident to note, because 2 years later, the mayor pens Executive Order 30. The mayor and his entourage, this was very near City Hall. In fact, I think it was near the City Hall station.
Near 1PP too.
The mayor walked down Broadway and he stopped at the FDNY command post. And then he stopped at the EMS command post. And then he stopped at the NYPD command post. And I'm not sure what he said to his entourage, but I saw him talking to them. And it was probably like, how come these people aren't working together? And that was the beginning. I'm not sure it was the actual beginning, but that was one incident that contributed to the mayor's desire to unify how agencies operate. And that led to an era where housing and transit will merge with the NYPD, and EMS and FDNY merge, and he creates OEM. Big era for positive era for public safety.
Oh yeah, and that segues perfectly into 1996, which was a major year for you and your career, because, like you said, spring of 1995, and Bratton and I talked about this earlier, folks. I'll mention what that interview and expand on it at the end. But 95. Transit goes into the NYPD in April 2nd of 95, and then a month later on May 1st, housing is absorbed by the NYPD as well. So there's a groundswell of personnel there. And a year later is when EMS merges into the FDNY. Now, Howard Safer was on last summer. He was a wonderful interview. And he specifically talked about how a fireman one day walked past him. This was during his time as FDNY commissioner before he became NYPD commissioner, and said, "Boss, Do you know we have the worst heart attack mortality rate in the 5 boroughs or anywhere in the world? Anybody that suffers a heart attack in the 5 boroughs, do you know we have the worst mortality rate? And his eyes get big. He's like, we do? He's like, yeah. Guy wasn't being smart with him. He was telling the truth. And so, after that, he starts adding CFRD runs to FDNY engines and sometimes even trucks too, but primarily engines, and they're going to these. And then comes the merger of 1996, which was his last act as fire commissioner before he went on over to the NYPD. Now, some people naturally, like with the police merger, some people were for it, some people were not. Some people, I'm sure, in EMS wanted this, some people did not. Which camp did you fall in?
Change is hard. I must admit that at the time I wasn't for it, but I'll also be happy to say, maybe that's not the right way to put it. HHC, Health and Hospital Corporation, did not give us the resources and the backbone that we needed. Yes, EMS was part of HHC and it gave me a career, but I mean, we had a horrible time in the 80s with vehicles and funding, and I believed that the FDNY at the time was just the big red machine that was going to absorb EMS, and I'm not quite sure it's happened that way. When you take an agency that runs that has added 90% medical runs into the fire department, and now you have CFR companies, and you have new fireground operations, and the way they do business, and the way the rescue paramedic program was created, and how the rescue paramedics are well integrated into fireground operations and structural collapses, et cetera. I think at the end of the day, this is a very positive thing. And I'll be happy to tell you, I was proud to say I was an FDNY deputy chief at the time, and that I didn't even seek that notoriety, but when I went to Colorado in my emergency management role, the chief of the fire department called me and he said, "Were you with the fire department in New York? I'm hearing rumors." And I met with the command team, and the rest is history.
And listen, there's no bigger honor to put on your resume, right? FDNY, which for me, and this is all due respect to any of the other fire departments out there, including the one I work for, but even they would say FDNY, greatest fire department, not just in the country, but in the world.
Yeah, and I had a good experience, with the FDNY. I talked about the fire on 49th Street, my relationship with Chief Jack Fanning at Hazmat, and Chief Ray Downey, because I was in SOD. We'd be on jobs together all the time. There was some sort of a mutual respect there. We had a fire on 75th Street and Fort Hamilton Parkway in a skating rink. It was called the American Skates, like American States. And we had something like 25 firefighters in. It was a 5-alarm fire. And I remember Ray Downey coming up to me, and I was the EMS commander. We called it EMS Incident Commander at the time. He came up to me and he congratulated me, and he wanted to know who I was. And he said, "I've never seen anything like that." And I was just doing what I was trained to do, program that Zach and some others that came before me did. And, we just got it done. Everything was organized. We got them transported. So at the end of the day, I think it was a good thing, but there's always room for improvement and better integration. And I'd like to see FDNY and EMS grow like that.
Oh, of course, I second that. And a lot of people, of course, feel the exact same way. That first year, there's always those growing pains because even if you know how to do the job, they're still learning to do things that specific agency's way. However you did it with New York City EMS has to be tweaked a little bit. Even if it's just a little bit, it's still a major change to acquiesce, or I should say acclimate, to how the FDNY may do things. And Dan Niagara was the first chief of EMS upon the merger. So working under him, 1996 to 1997, how essential was he in getting you guys more comfortable and getting you guys fitted into the FDNY mold, if you will?
I don't think they could have picked a better leader, because not only did Dan have a passion for the fire department, he had the right personality to ease EMS into the fire department. I didn't work that long with Dan in that capacity, but I believe his knowledge of the fire department and his passion for leadership and his wanting, because I was in the meetings where he was, he'd pick our brains. I mean, this was like, make us feel like the big red machine was consuming us. The Borg was consuming us. He made us feel different. And when I was appointed to OEM, he actually came to my going away party at some place on Bell Boulevard, and he sat with me and the guys and the gals, and he was there for hours, and it really was a game changer.
I can imagine. I want to go back real quick because where I first found out years ago that New York City EMS was its own separate agency, I was doing some research for what eventually became Tales from the Boom Room, which is my NYPD Bomb Squad miniseries and Arson Explosion Squad miniseries. And at one point, my research particularly was for Detective Claude Richards, because his partner, Dan McNally, was coming on the show. Claude Richards unfortunately perished on 9/11. He was one of the 23 NYPD officers that did. Member of the Bomb Squad, and there's a scene where in 1995, he's at a bomb job, and it's a package found in the subway, which turns out to be nothing, and him and Dan McNally and Detective Tom Connolly handle the job just fine. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, what is this clip from? Because I'd like to see the whole thing. They did a documentary on New York City EMS during the summer of 1995. And that's where people got to look at just what you guys had to endure. It's filmed primarily in Manhattan. But with these things, it's always tricky to get access because sometimes some city agencies are a little bit hesitant. They don't know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But you being in a leadership role at the time, how much of a say did you have in letting them film the EMS personnel on the street at that time in 95?
I was involved in a number of different films that were created at the time, and it was my job as a chief officer at EMS to put our best foot forward, and that meant getting us the best publicity that we possibly could. So I'm going to give a shout out to an old friend and colleague who was our press secretary at the time, David Bookstaver, in the 90s. Bookie was instrumental in getting us the best publicity he possibly could, because we were the stepchild. This is pre-merger, right? And we were not funded well, and yet we had an extraordinarily difficult job. We were met with violence. I was assaulted. I had multiple stitches on my face at a shooting. We had 4 people shot in a bar, and this guy thought we weren't treating his cousin, which of course we were, and he attacked me at the hospital. And I went down, and he went down, and everybody goes, as they say. And a bunch of people went to the station in handcuffs. I was in the hospital. There's been violence against EMTs and paramedics more recently. The captain in Queens, the EMT who was run over by her own rig a few years ago in the Bronx. In the Bronx, and a number of violence incidents, but also just the job itself, the what goes on in the back of the truck. But many of the PD guys and FDNY guys I worked with knew what went on in the back of the truck. Because if I'm running a hot code or a hot trauma, I need help in the back. I can remember being a paramedic in Coney Island, and we only had one trauma center in the borough, Kings County. That's a solid 12-mile ride. And I got now, we're moving 70 miles an hour up Ocean Parkway, and I got a cop squeezing the IV bag, to make sure we're pumping fluids into this guy. And I'm pumping up the mass trousers. Those were these inflatable pants we used back in the day that auto transfused of blood volume from the lower extremity to the core of the body. This was like military stuff, but we had these and we used these. And so it's not that they didn't understand what went on, and I never felt disrespected by the other agencies. I felt disrespected by our own parent agency and the city for not funding us well or providing best salaries they could for EMS personnel.
And still haven't.
And they still haven't. And I don't mind saying that. And yeah. I mean, even the current retirement is just a little different. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation to advancing an 1 3/4 up a charged hallway or ventilating from the inside, but there is definitely a hazard that exists on the scene of a major emergency, especially a major trauma when there's no help. And we were on the scene many times we'd get in before the radio car or before the engine and truck, and we'd be treating Here's one. I was chief in Queens. I was on the scene of a multiple shooting at a post office in Rockaway. Now, if you think about Rockaway, right, it's a barrier island out there, the 100th precinct. Very limited EMS resources. There's of course, fire companies. So we got 2 people shot. I got no ambulances available. I get flagged down. I'm not even dispatched to this thing. We don't even know about it. Now I'm treating 2 individuals that were shot at the post office. I have no NYPD on the scene. I have 2 U.S. Postal Police who were shocked because U.S. Postal Police they don't deal with urban street violence, and they were not very helpful. And I mean that with the utmost respect. They did the best they could to control the crowd. The crowd's getting violent because I don't have transport capabilities. I'm screaming for help on the radio. Finally, a medic unit and a BLS unit come and we transport the victims. But I was on the scene quite a while by myself. That's a hazard. That's the kind of hazard that nobody in EMS should confront. An engine has what, 3 or 4 guys on it? Not 3,
Yep.
4 or 5 guys on it these days. Certainly, a truck company has the resources. An EMS unit, you can be on the scene for a while until you get some help.
Of course, and that's where you really have to, as Roma Torre, a friend of mine, formerly of New York One, calls it, tap dance. Although she was applying it in a journalistic sense, the same is true of this. You try to survive as best you can until you get those resources. I'm going to go back to the formation of OEM in '96 in a second, but Kevin Dowling is in the chat, and he says,
Kevin.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks to Steve and Zach, I became well-versed in MCI ICS, which made me a better EMS lieutenant and into my next career with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So,
yeah, Kevin was absolutely a superstar in Queens. And I remember not only rolling out and doing jobs with Kevin, but spending time together, and he would ask the right questions. And it's really good. It's really good to see you, Kevin. We're connected on social media, but thank you for what you said. That's great.
And thanks for being in the chat tonight, Kevin. I do appreciate it, certainly. So like I said, 96, a big year for you. With the FDNY merger also comes the formation of OEM, whereas we talked about earlier, that interagency collaboration is now official. Now you have the NYPD perspective, the EMS perspective, along with the FDNY perspective in that office operating out of 7 World Trade Center. It's a new thing for everyone. And no matter what it is, even if there's some uncertainty, it's still an honor to be asked to be a charter member, to have yourself be a part of that process. So as far as getting into OEM, tell me about that opportunity.
Well, that's good. That's a bit of a funny story, which I probably wouldn't tell, but in honor of Jerry's passing, I'm going to tell this part of it. We had the UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, and when we had the UNGA, EMS would set up a command post at the Port Authority Police Building 269 at Kennedy Airport, and we would coordinate medical escorts because every VIP that came in got an EMS transport as part of the motorcade that went into Manhattan. So we had 2 EMTs and I think a lieutenant at the command post, and I was chief in Queens, and I went there as part of my daily rounds to check in and see if they needed anything. And I get a call on the radio, 10-1, the tour commander, call the tour commander, which is our city, not like a citywide tour commander in FDNY at the time. Tour commander was a communications captain that ran citywide operations, was basically in charge of the communication center, but also called policy for field stuff until supervisors can get on the scene. The duty chiefs were called just that, duty chief. So I was the Queen's duty chief, and they said, hey, Jerry Howard's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. And I said, Jerry Howard? Jerry Howard was emergency manager at EMS during the Jim Kerr administration. Jim Kerr was the executive director of EMS, another great leader that helped bring EMS out of the dark ages in the 80s. And the civilian emergency management job, he wasn't the first emergency manager. A gentleman by the name of Jim Alexander had that job before him, but Jerry would do the interagency stuff just like an emergency manager would. He had already had time in the U.S. Army as an officer, and he was a crisis manager at IBM. And so at this time, I had already interviewed for the OEM position because there was a really odd, obscure ad in the newspaper for an urban northeast city is looking for an emergency management director. Like, we didn't know what it was. And a bunch of us applied. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview for that. So Jerry picks up the phone and he says, hey, Skinny, you know that job you applied for? Yeah. He's like, well, you're not getting it. But they gave me a list, and I'd like you to come on board, possibly as one of the deputy directors. He's like, meet me at this place tomorrow. So we meet in a diner in Kips Bay in Manhattan. Jerry didn't know anything outside Manhattan. New York City was Manhattan. Anything outside Manhattan was my problem. So he had one of his, at this time, Jerry was Indiana State Emergency Management Director, right? So he gets summoned by the Giuliani folks, and they offer him in this position. You know the term back of the napkin, Mike, right?
Yes.
So I walk into this diner, sit down, literally hand drawn on the back of a diner napkin was an org chart. And he shows me what this thing is going to look like. And he shows me where he wants me to be. And the rest is history. And well, no, that's not true. The rest is not history, because then I had to go through this grueling vetting process by City Hall. And I met with Randy Mastro, Deputy Mayor Randy Mastro, Tony Coles, Denny Young was the mayor's chief of staff. I met with those three people, and they put you through the ringer. They asked hardcore, they were political questions. They were not emergency management questions. They were like, yeah, we got this. You came to us recommended by Jerry. We know you got that, but let's talk about policy and politics. It was tough, but it's something I'm proud of, because there I was.
And to even be considered is an honor in and of itself, even if you don't ultimately get it. To be at least in that conversation, it's the ultimate feather in your cap.
It's really true, because I was considered a mayoral appointee, and that is something I carry with me, into my career today. In fact, when I was in emergency manager in Colorado, I had a letter, an exit letter, when I left OEM and went into other, greener pastures. And the mayor sent me a wonderful going away letter. And I had that letter framed, and it was in my office wall. And the mayor was very popular in Colorado at the time, and people, like my bosses, they were like, is that his real signature? Yeah, that's the real letter. That's not a copy. It's not a photo. It's that's the real thing. So yeah, all of that I'm very proud of. But more than anything, Mike, OEM, like everything else in my career, was a growth opportunity. I learned stuff that I would never have had that opportunity to learn without that.
And of course, across multiple states, and even in New York, operating upstate, operating in different agencies in and around the state. And of course, being down in Florida too, you carry those experiences with you. And if you can handle emergencies in New York, and that's not to minimize emergencies elsewhere, I've heard you talk about it on 5 Minutes to Chaos, some of the stuff you've dealt with outside the state, and they were certainly big stuff. But if you can handle emergencies in New York, which you spent 20 years doing between EMS, FDNY, and OEM, you can handle emergencies anywhere.
I thought so too. And then this urban guy parachutes in as a dark horse candidate to this job in Colorado. And I now have to learn wildfires. Now, I always like saying this. They'd say, hey, what do you know about wildfires? I'm like, dude, we get some wildfires in New York, but not your kind. And so we were fortunate. I was the emergency management head for a utility, an electric and water utility. And at the time, the utility had, I'm sure they still do, they have a wildfire team that protects our assets, because we had critical infrastructure across 12 counties, 11 counties actually, dams, 26 dams and reservoirs. We produced 150 million gallons of water a day and electricity for a population of 500,000. We had multiple water treatment plants, electric generation plants, and that was all under my purview. All that had to be protected from wildfire. If you think of wildfires, you think California and Colorado.
Of course, again, some pretty nasty ones. And look at Hawaii right now. I'm pretty sure your ears turned up when you heard the news about that, and it reminded you of some of the responses that you had previously.
Yeah, every time there's, you think you've seen it all, and nothing could get worse. The fact that there was a wildfire in an island in the Middle Pacific is mind-boggling. The images coming out of Lahaina, I want to send my respects and best wishes. I know some of the emergency managers out in Hawaii, and we've had some connectivity on LinkedIn, and they're sending out messages that they're okay, but they got a long road ahead.
Of course, and right now 53 have perished in this, and that death toll, unfortunately, is expected to rise.
Yeah.
And we definitely send our thoughts out there. A year after you ended up retiring from the FDNY/OEM in 2000, and a year later is when 9/11 hits. And Zach responded that day. He was very fortunate to survive, as he talked about on this program. And EMS particularly, I mean, they're counted as firefighters. That's why the toll is 343. But specifically for the EMS Bureau, there was Ricardo Quinn and Carlos Dilo who perished in that attack.
Thank you for bringing that up.
No problem. And of course, there was the 8 EMTs from independent ambulance agencies that day that perished as well.
And thank you for bringing that up, because they often get lost in the sauce.
And as they should not be, which is why it's important to mention them. And with that being said, even though it had only been listen, even though you had retired by this point, technically speaking, you're still very much in the game. You're still very connected. And between NYPD, FDNY, Port Authority Police, I can't imagine how many people you knew that lost their lives that day or lost someone that they cared about. So being back in the city around that time, if at all, after something like that, and watching the events unfold that day. First of all, where were you that day, and when did you get down there?
Okay, so I was actually in Florida, as it would have it, at an anti-terrorism conference for the healthcare sector. So how hospitals would prepare for terrorist attacks. And I was sitting in the general session, and a friend and colleague, emergency management colleague, who I mentioned earlier, Jim Alexander, who has since passed away from unrelated illness. There's another story there. Got me. He says he's waving at me from the kind of the end of the conference hall. It's like, come on. So I walk over there. He said, hey, a small plane hit one of the towers. I'm like, okay, like, is everybody all right? He's like, no, it looks like there's a bit of a fire going on. And then, we saw the fire grow, and they brought a TV over, and we started watching it. One of the conference attendees was a retired naval aviator. He was in 06 in the U.S. Navy. He was a CAG, actually, on an aircraft carrier. And when the second plane hit, he said, that's a 737. Of course, it was a 767, but he's like, we're under attack. And we were obviously under attack. I made my way back to New York City by Amtrak. Started to drive, but my friend Jimmy wasn't feeling well, and driving in the car was not the best way to do it. So I called a friend of mine, Billy Gross, childhood friend, who ended up working at EMS and now works for AT&T FirstNet. And he, at the time, connected me with another friend, John. Last name escapes me. John was the chief of the Long Island Railroad Police, the MTA Police, and now was chief of the Amtrak Police. John got me on John O'Connor. John got me and Jimmy on the auto train out of Sanford, Florida. So we drove there, dropped the car, got on the auto train. Well, guess who was on the auto train? We had the Boston Red Sox, and the rest of the train were firefighters. Used bunker gear all over the place. People were going to either New York or Washington, D.C. So we got to travel back on the auto train, got into D.C., put us on a bus, because the auto train goes to Lorton, Virginia. It's about an hour south of D.C. Got on a bus. They take us right past the Pentagon. Pentagon is still smoldering. It's still on fire. And they take us to Union Station. The metro... what was it called? The metro train Amtrak metro train up into New York, and basically went to work at that time. I had already been working as an emergency management consultant to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which, for those that don't know, owns and operates the property, the World Trade Center property. And we were under a consulting agreement to develop anti-terrorism emergency management plans for the Port Authority facilities, and we were working to develop these plans for the airports, the seaports, and their commercial properties. So when I got back in town, we went to work, my team and I, in support of the Port Authority. We helped them build out an emergency operations center in Jersey City, and we supported on-scene operations for the next number of months. We had an interagency meeting every morning at the command post, which was, if memory serves, truck 7 engine 1 on Duane Street. Did I get that right, or was that reversed?
I think so. And somebody can always correct us in the chat.
Yep. Yeah. Engine 1 ladder 7 over on Duane Street, they would bring the apparatus out and they'd set up a table, and there had to be 100 people at this interagency meeting. Chief Frank Crothers ran the meeting, and we all participated. We had our marching orders for the day, developed an operational plan for the day, and I did that for a while.
And again, this is an uneasy time to say the least. And because particularly, I mean, look at the Port Authority Police and look at the FDNY. And I'm not minimizing the NYPD's losses. Of course, losing 23 is terrible. And pretty much half of the response team from the emergency service unit that was sent down there that day perished. But looking at specifically the command structure, the NYPD's command structure stayed intact. Pat Bogan says that we're correct. So he says, you're right. It is exactly that company you mentioned.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that. Port Authority Police loses its superintendent, Fred Marone. Also loses its chief, James Romito. So you can't talk to them. FDNY, Downey, Gansey, Fian, Burns, Palmer. So many chiefs perished to where can you still talk to some? Sure. But that command structure, with the exception of Commissioner Von Essen, who himself was fortunate to survive that day, was pretty much wiped out. Which, looking at it strictly from a tactical standpoint, of course, there's the human element, too, of losing these dedicated men and good men, too, on top of that. From a tactical standpoint, how hard was it to not have their input?
I saw people experiencing their worst, performing at their absolute best from every agency. I happen to know Chief Frank Crothers from a DoD program we sat on together. It was a bioweapons program that at the time was classified. We would travel together with NYPD, senior brass, and health department and other members. We would go down to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, and we were working on bioterrorism plans for New York City. So we happened to know each other. So some other NYPD guys and FDNY guys were on the program. EMS, public health, I mentioned. So what happens in situations like this is that the best step up to the plate, and you overcome those challenges. It was hard. I mean, this is the beginning of an era of what I call man hugs. I remember walking into the right before that, you do like a, hey brother, how are you? I walked into one of the command centers. It might have been at the pier, and Vinny Dougherty was a firefighter with hazmat, who I happen to know very well. And we just hugged, and we just did the hug thing for as long as we had to, and we cried, and that's the beginning of man hugs. And now I have no problem doing the man hug thing with my kids. I have 2 sons, or in public, or with guys that I haven't seen in a while. And I'm there. I'm all about the relationships.
No, of course. Listen, there's no shame in that, because you never know when you're going to see somebody again. And Tim Farrell and I were talking about it, right? We were comparing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I worked with Timmy too when he was in 2 Truck, of course.
Oh yeah, no, great guy. When I featured him for my emergency service unit miniseries, and Tim and I were talking about it, like 1995 when Oklahoma City experienced the bombing of the Murray building. Think about the guys, and there were plenty of FDNY guys. Unfortunately, it was 6 years later would perish. But from the ESU side, Tom Langone, Mike Curtin, guys that he worked with in FEMA, guys that he worked with in ESU, cared for them both very deeply. Yeah. Loved them both very deeply. Who would have thought that 6 years after going to something like that, something even worse would strike them back home, and neither of those men, would survive the incident. So in general, even not an emergency response, I've lost a few friends along the way to illness. If there's somebody out there I care about, I let them know. The bro hug, as Pat Bogan's saying.
I saw the bro hug. That's it. Right.
Yeah.
I saw a certain resilience that I don't think we all knew that we had.
Yeah.
I had been around public safety deaths. I'd been at the scene or at the hospital with police officers shot and killed. We had a fire in a public housing, and when I was chief in Queens, and in Rockaway, we had the breeze coming off the wind coming off the ocean caused a flashover, and we lost 2 firefighters. And we had I was at the ER Peninsula Hospital with Rudy Giuliani and a fire commissioner and some other brass. And these are small. I'm not belittling anything. They're small incidents compared to the big 9/11 incident. 9/11 forced all of us to be resilient and step up. Now, I'm not saying we're all still not suffering. I'm not saying that I don't have some odd behaviors from what I experienced, what I went through. I'm not sure you know this, but my brother-in-law died. Was FDNY. He died in 2017 from the cancer, the 9/11
I didn't know that. I didn't.
cancer.
I'm sorry.
My brother-in-law was a rescue paramedic. He emerged from the towers covered in the dust like other people. He was at Battalion 2-3. He got dispatched to the scene, and he was married to my sister. And in around 08, 09, he started developing severe illness, and he perished in 2017. And we get past it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to continue to be resilient despite that, And again, those odd behaviors are not odd at all. When you go through something like that, you're going to have those scars with you, and they are scars. But how you handle them comes to define the rest of your life. And, you've handled them pretty well. You have a great outlet, as we'll talk about momentarily with 5 Minutes to Chaos. But yeah, I get it. I certainly get it from everyone that was down there and that experienced that. And I just had the chance to go to Randall's Island for the first time. And we were there for a plaque dedication. And a majority of those plaques that were being dedicated to fallen members were for those that perished as a result of 9/11 cancer.
It's really, I think the number of people that have perished since 9/11 from illness are or have exceeded those that were actually killed on the day of the attacks.
For the FDNY,
that is absolutely mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the program. I'm monitored. I was down there, as I mentioned. I'm sure everybody listening is part of that. And I just wish everybody the best, and I send my love to everybody because, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Almost 22 years later, we're literally exactly a month from the 22-year anniversary of that day. And listen, across an entire career, even without an incident like that. And by the way, before I continue, this is what I wanted to ask you. That flashover, are you talking about Vandalia Avenue in 1998?
No. This would have been after that. No, Vandalia Avenue is in East New York. This would have been on Beach Channel Drive, if memory serves. The year escapes me, but I wasn't. No, that wasn't in Rockaway. This was on the peninsula.
Okay, and if anybody in the chat remembers that, just put it in the chat so I have it for context and can reference it later. But now to the 5 Minutes to Chaos podcast, which I love listening to. I listened to your latest episode and thought it was fantastic. With that being said, even without a major incident like that, there's still a lot that you see, and being able to talk about it in a professional sense and to an extent a therapeutic sense too takes a lot. And not only that, but any podcast. And I understand this, having done as many episodes as I have. I know you're starting to understand this as you continue your endeavors. It is a labor of love. It is a lot of work. So yes. Putting it together, and you've done a great job in such a short period of time, what prompted the desire to want to do a podcast, and what would you attribute the success to thus far?
So, I fancy myself not only a student of emergency management, but also a teacher. I have 40 some odd years in the business. My first emergency management job was when I was an SOD lieutenant, because I did field emergency response every day. I have experiences. And as a New Yorker and somebody that has worked around the country, I have been blessed, if you could think of tragedies in that way, to experience being an emergency manager in those roles. Urban scenarios, rural and suburban scenarios when I was in Colorado or elsewhere. I wanted to have a podcast, but I didn't want it to be, let's talk about programs, let's talk about doctrine, let's talk about, your career. No, we do that because I think that's part of that's part of the buildup. I feel the emergency management community, and I'm as much a career emergency manager as I was an EMS professional, because I've been in emergency management longer now, is at a bit of a crossroads, and it's growing in a positive way. But there are people entering the business, and here's where I sound like the old, gray-haired curmudgeon, that haven't seen or haven't been here's the way I put it. And I was talking with Kelly McKinney recently, actually, just a few hours ago. We were talking about Jerry. And until you have done 30 hours in standing watch in an emergency operations center or an EOC, hammering away at a major incident. So in New York City, think of my time in New York City OEM, power outages, all of Manhattan out or all of Queens out, much of the Bronx, hurricanes, tropical storms, and until you do that, and you have some overcaffeinated, caffeine breathed mayor and emergency manager barking in your face, and you're challenged to get stuff done, you just haven't seen it. So we have folks coming out today, and this is a scenario that people like me have built. We have, because I have 2 degrees in my profession. I have a master's in Homeland Security and a bachelor's in emergency management. So we have folks coming out, young folks about your age, Mike, that are all fresh and shiny, but they're not dirty and bloody. And that's because they haven't experienced it yet. So I encourage young emergency managers to find an aggressive shop, whether that's in the corporate side, where you're running like an Amazon or a Walmart. A friend of mine just recently left Amazon. He was an emergency manager. His job was to take an IMT out to Amazon facilities that had experienced floods, wildfires, some other types of disasters. And he did restoration, damage assessments, restoration. I mean, that's corporate emergency management. And until you get that experience, you're just not going. So to answer your question, I like to give those folks that experience. Not everybody I have on the show is from New York, although the New York guys have some great stories. The episode that just dropped was it last week, the Value Jet crash in the Florida Everglades. That is an incredible story told by an incredible emergency manager, Bill Johnson, from at the time Miami-Dade County and ultimately Palm Beach County emergency management director. This week was a colleague, emergency management colleague. This episode dropped this morning. I'm sorry, yesterday. The episodes dropped Thursdays at 2 a.m. We talk about fires and floods and all sorts of extreme hazards in Colorado that we confronted together. But he talks about the 2019 bomb cyclone blizzard, where we had, and think of this if you're a fire department, right? So here we have ESU guys here, FDNY guys, EMS guys listening. So now you're a fire department in a semi-rural environment, and a blizzard comes and you start doing PSAs 2 days out and tell people stay off the roads, don't go on the roads. And if you go on the roads, take a snack bar with you and a bottle of water. And then what happens? You have 2,200, that's 2,200 autos in your county alone. Don't even talk about statewide, where people are trapped. Now, how are they trapped? Because a Colorado blizzard brings with it extreme winds, and these cars were not only stuck in the snow, they were covered. So you couldn't see the cars. So now we have to have, so there's the county search and rescue team. It couldn't go out. We have the fire department, Colorado Springs, the fire department in the city of Falcon to the east of Colorado Springs, and then smaller departments as you travel east into the more rural areas. They really can't operate because they can't move. And I had the opportunity to send a couple snowcats out because I worked for a utility that had infrastructure in the Colorado mountains. But that's the kind of crises we talk about. That's the kind of one-off people wouldn't really think about. So, by the way, Mike, once you rescue those people, they still got to be sheltered. So it's a pretty big operation.
Oh, of course. And that's what I like about the show. That's something I'm trying to do with this show, right? I mentioned the last episode was the first volume of a new miniseries. I realized that, listen, there are many great stories that New York City police officers and New York City firefighters have told on this show, and they'll continue to, because they'll continue to reach out and profile them, including yourself tonight, for example. But there's so many other stories out there. What's it like to be a fireman or a police officer in Cleveland, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Miami, and so on and so forth. And even here in my backyard in New Haven, Connecticut, that, each situation is different. The makeup and the geography of each location, the emergencies that may arise are different because naturally in a country of, over how many people do we have? 300 million people in this country alone, I think 316. It's not that everything's going to be the same. But the more perspectives you hear, the more informed you become. the less jaded and the less, but tunnel-minded you become. And as a result, even if you don't go into the profession, me as just a civilian listening to it, I certainly feel better off, and I feel a lot more educated.
And things are different. You're absolutely right. So just a quick snapshot. Colorado Springs Fire Department. That's where I lived and worked. I worked for the Colorado Springs Utility, which is an energy and water utility. The fire department in Colorado Springs is an extraordinary fire and EMS agency. They run, at the time when I left, they had 23 paramedic engines. So that's a paramedic on every engine, if not two, because the officer may have been a paramedic in his prior firefighter life. And then you have 6 truck companies, 2 hazmats, and a heavy rescue. And then each of the stations have different responsibilities. Like one station is a decon facility. After a structure fire, they wash all the turnout here, that kind of thing. But every engine has a wildfire truck attached to it. So whether it's a type 4, a type 3, or a type 4 engine, they don't roll on every run. But if there's a report of a wildfire, you got to hit that quick, because it's pretty dry in Colorado. There's a humidity in Colorado is typically under 20%, hence the wildfire threat. Unlike where I live in Florida now, where it's 100 degrees and 100% humidity. And of course, I'm not exaggerating today.
No, that's why it's good to be in the AC. And I love Florida, but I don't envy that part of it. That's the one thing I don't envy. Yeah. And I mean, listen, being half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, I love the warmth. I hate the winter, but there's a line, and even that's too much for me. Kevin Dowling, before you continue, contributes as well. Great explanation, Steve, regarding 5 minutes to chaos. Many do not have that trial by fire, no pun intended. Podcasts like these at least put those seeds in the back of heads, and hopefully they pull these bits of information and use them. And I'm doing that, Kevin. To your point, I'm doing that.
And that's exactly my point. So, I guess I come full Robin now. What I want to do with my podcast is contribute. I want to give back. And by giving back, I'm paying it forward to those, if that makes any sense. I'm paying it forward to those that haven't had those experiences yet. Because Bill Johnson makes you feel like you're on that deck where they built this ramp for the swamp response recovery for the value jet. Jim today talks about different types of incidents. And in Phil Parr's episode, we talk about the fires in Starrett City and one where some firefighters were lost. So, and then we talk about something different. I don't want to talk about ICS. If that's something and how you responded to it, that's fine. But the incident command system is 53 years old. It was created in 1970. We want to talk about creativity. We want to talk about what you did different. What did you do that might have been within the confines of structure? But I go to so many exercises, Mike, and you'll hear less experienced folks talking for a long period of time about how they're going to set up their operation. I want to hear what we're going to do to help the people. Emergency management is a people first profession. Jerry Howard made it very clear to me and the team when we formed OEM, and I'm going to give Jerry another plug here.
Absolutely.
Emergency management is about people. Rule number 1. Rule number 2, get shit done. And that's it. Those are the 2 rules. Everything else was back it in. And we worked within the programs. I got an SBA declaration for a crane collapse. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. Small Business Administration. We would get, we got declarations for flood events throughout the city. We did all the program stuff. But at the end of the day, it was about people, and it was about getting it done. And I apologize for my little slip there.
It's all right. I can always edit it out. But the point is well taken. The point is most definitely understood. And again, our condolences to Jerry's family. A very sad loss, but a wonderful legacy he left behind that people like you will certainly carry on, and that we're fortunate enough to work with him now. The hour and a half has flown by, and it's crazy to think, but we had so much fun talking. The show, so you know what's coming next, and that's the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. We're going to go right into it. And if this isn't G-rated, you can tell me off the air, and I'd be happy to hear it. Funniest call you ever responded to?
So, I got so many calls, but it's not actually a call. I'm going to tell you a quick story about the governor of Puerto Rico. You just mentioned that you're Puerto Rican. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember what storm it was, but New York City had a propensity of sending plane loads of water to the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. In fact, I took a team to the Dominican Republic with 25 New York City responders at Giuliani's direction in 1998, Hurricane George. And we worked in Santo Domingo and San Pedro de Macorís. So we're on an interagency call, And the governor of Puerto Rico, and I'm not going to pretend to do a Hispanic accent, basically says, he says, I don't want no water. I don't want no effing water. You tell Giuliani that we need diapers. And the governor was fixated on diapers. Somewhere along the line, first of all, he was overwhelmed. I get it. But he went off and it was all about diapers. It wasn't about water. We sent plenty of water. It was kind of thing we did. And I mean, I'm sure he needed the diapers, but I mean, we could all but bust out laughing because, he's obviously in distress. It's just the way he's expressing himself.
It's like if you ever see that clip of Allen Iverson, we're not talking about the game, not the game. We're talking about practice.
Yeah, yeah,
it's
no,
like,
it was hysterical, and yeah,
yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I can imagine what that accent must have sounded like. Before I continue, this was the fire you were talking about earlier. So it wasn't two firefighters; it was one, and that was James Williams out in the Rockaways
okay,
in January of 1996. This was him. He was a
that sounds
12-year
right.
veteran of ladder 121, and he was the one, unfortunately, that perished that day in a wind-driven fire. Which, as FDNY LK 6007 mentions, that fire began the change in how the FDNY approach wind-impacted fires. So
Thank you for correcting the record because I was there and it was tragic. I mean, I wasn't at the fire scene, but I saw videos and yeah, I know what you're talking about. The firefighter that just mentioned that. Yeah.
But I appreciate you mentioning that in the chat, as Steve said, correcting the record. Second, from funniest call, most uplifting call. And you don't have to say one. You can say multiple if you want. Most
No,
uplifting call or calls you responded to.
no. This was the call where, for me, it all started coming together in the most profound way. The date escapes me at the moment. Anybody who's listening to this can Google it. I probably should have wrote it down. I was on citywide patrol with another SOD lieutenant, gentleman by the name of Bruce Butt. He may have been in training even. And call comes in for a gas explosion, 18th Avenue, McDonald Borough, Brooklyn. 4 buildings were leveled. I believe there were 4 fatalities. And there was active fire when we got on the scene. I'm sure it was a multiple alarm. And everything that Zach and the chiefs before him had developed and all the protocols and all the programs came to bear that day. And we set up the on-scene operation exactly the way the book said. That in itself was fulfilling. The other thing that was profound for that day, it was one of the first times the agencies stood on the same corner and developed strategy together. We actually said, okay, how do we do this together? Because clearly it's a fire scene. Nobody disputed that. It's a fire. Fire department is the incident commander, but there were ESU cops, there was large EMS present, and we still had ongoing patients. It was in the summer. It was hot like it is today, or at least here in Florida. That was uplifting to the extent that we started to see the fruits of our labors and my emergency management skills start to come to bear.
Absolutely. And when that's the case, I mean, hey, it's amazing. You worked across many different boroughs, and you had your tentacles specifically in 3 of the 5. But nevertheless, I'll still ask the question, of the 5, which was your favorite to work in?
It's got to be Manhattan. It was when I was promoted to deputy chief and I left SOD. The best thing they could have done was assign me to Manhattan because that's where the action was. And I worked evenings, which meant the borough commander and the other chiefs went home, and that left me as the borough duty chief. And that means I had the whole borough to play in. And I was a field guy. I would do my paperwork, and we had tons of it. I would do my paperwork early, and I had at one point I had 2 stations. Meaning I had half the borough. I had 59th Street up to the Spuyten Duyvil Bridge under my command because I had Station 18 Harlem and Station 15 Met, and the voluntary hospitals. We would coordinate their responses as well, like New York Presbyterian, etc. So that was the most fun, especially on the evening shift. We just did great stuff, and Patty Pogan was on 2 truck, and they'd come by for coffee, and then we'd be at a job together, and that is how it works.
Yeah, there's nothing better, and I'm someone that spends a lot of time in the city. A lot of my family's down there, a lot of my friends, and my clientele for my consulting business is down there too. And there's nothing better than a summer day in New York City. When it's like it was today, sunshine. You're walking about. There's just nothing better. And when you can hop on an emergency vehicle and go anywhere in the borough, especially at night, It's like being a kid, and mom says, "Yeah, you can stay out as long as you want." There's nothing better.
Dude, I got, 6 rotations around the sun going on here, and I still feel I live in West Palm Beach. We have, really good fire department here, and I know the assistant chief, who's the city emergency manager. I see an engine company go by, or a couple engines in a truck. I text him, "Hey, what's going on?" And before I know, hey, there was a car wash. I saw the smoke. There was a car wash on fire. And they were doing it there. Quick story. I'm chief uptown. This is pre-merger. These two ESU REPs show up from housing.
Yep,
I
housing
said,
rescue.
What is that? And these cops came in, housing cops came in, and they're talking to somebody out in my office. I see them talking, and they knock on the door. I said, "Chief, some ESU cops from housing here. They want to talk to you." I'm like, "Okay, send them in." They gave us great equipment, but they didn't give us any trauma gear. Could you help us out? Oh my God, I couldn't give them enough trauma gear. I had an equipment coordinator. I mean, I wasn't giving them surgical equipment. I was giving them, trauma gear, pads and tape, and maybe the disposable bag valve mask and stuff. And they went out there like a kid in a candy shop, because that's interagency cooperation. My giving 2 ESU trucks that were going to service the same area I was servicing gave me some great inroads with another police agency. And then, of course, they merged. But that's just the way you do business.
Oh, of course. 2 quick stories. Now that you mentioned the Housing Police Emergency Rescue Unit. So they got started, for context, and I've explained this before, but for those of you tuning in for the first time tonight, Housing Police had their Emergency Rescue Unit. They didn't call it ESU, it was ERU. Very briefly, started on New Year's Eve, 1993, got absorbed into ESU August 15th, 1994. The anniversary is in a few days. And later on, they got merged in fully when the merge hit in May of 95. So as a standalone unit, they did not have, heavy rescue trucks. They didn't have heavy weapons, but they did have a lot of extrication equipment and medical equipment.
Right.
And the funny story here is the Housing Police's color scheme at this point was a heavier emphasis on white with blue and orange, which is the colors of the New York State flag.
Well,
And
also, like at the time, EMS was orange and blue, so they kind of look like EMS trucks.
Yeah, they did. And Billy Kennedy, who's a good friend of mine, who was a sergeant in Truck 1 ESU, amongst other places, including Truck 7 and Truck 4, used to call them the Good Humor Truck because they look like the Good Humor ice cream truck. So a little quick story on them. And the other story, to your point about getting excited, like I said, I work in a fire department over in West Haven, where I joke I'm the Swiss Army knife. Even though I'm their social media guy, I kind of function as an administrative assistant. We get a call. I haven't seen my first fire yet, so hopefully that's coming soon. And we get a call for smoke condition in a building. Our firehouse, for context, is 2 floors. I hear the call upstairs. I'm typing away on my computer. I go running down like prime Usain Bolt into the watch desk, and I'm panting. I'm like, "Chief, you going to that?" He's like, "Look at you, you stem whacker. You just want to go to it. It's probably food on the stove." I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
I'm like, "I'm a buff. What can I say?"
Yeah, but when I started the job, Mike, I thought I was going to see all kinds of exciting stuff, and you see tough stuff too.
Yeah.
The first, EMS pronounces. They have the authority in the medical examiner to pronounce DOAs. First DOA pronounced was a SIDS death. Sudden infant death syndrome over on Fountain Avenue in Brooklyn. I mean, that's just something that sticks with me forever.
Yeah, of course. It's tough. It's tough, which is why it's good to have an outlet like 5 Minutes to Chaos, where you can have a healthy place, which is not down the barrel of a bottle, and certainly not down the barrel of a gun, which unfortunately too many first responders make both choices. To vent those experiences to people who understand, and certainly to a sympathetic audience. Fourth, on a lighter note, and this is a question that you can also give multiple responses to: favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
So my favorite bar and restaurant was a place on 23rd Street off of 7th Avenue called Centro Vasco. And it was kind of a Spanish-oriented lobster restaurant. They're not there anymore. Last time I was in New York, they were closed, and I have a feeling they were a victim of the pandemic. So when my family and I travel to New York now, one of my sons lives in uptown. He's a doc uptown. We
Nice.
We go to WoHop. the most famous, Chinese restaurant on the planet. My only problem with Wohop is the food tastes better at 1:30 in the morning. And last I checked, they weren't open all night. And we used to go, when I worked in Manhattan, when I was chief of Manhattan. I mean, that was fuel. And we'd meet up there with the units and the other bosses and whatever. You walk in 2 in the morning, there's cops, it's great.
Of course, there's many people who have said exactly that. Cops, firemen, EMS alike. That was the place to stop. It was the friendliest restaurant around for first responders in that particular area. So I'm glad you mentioned it. And fifth and finally, you have so much experience, not just in New York City, but across many different places, as we've talked about tonight. So if you could go back in time to auxiliary cop Steve Kerr, or even newbie rookie New York City EMS version of Steve Kerr, knowing everything you know now, and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what advice would this Steve Kerr tell that Steve Kerr?
It's a good couple things. One, and it's all centered around training and education. One, seek out solid leadership training, because whatever job you're in, whether you're a ground pounding EMT or paramedic, or you're starting to climb the ranks, or you're a firefighter riding the tailboard, and I know that dates me, or you're an officer on the radio car, you're in charge of something. You could be in charge of, like when I was that paramedic that forgot I was supposed to be in charge of that bus accident, you were in charge giving orders or something. But you know what? As a paramedic, I had legal obligation to be in charge of medical scenes, even if it was a single patient event. So if I had EMTs on the scene, they were, under my charge, because I had the higher medical training. So in order to lead people, you have to have the right training. Leadership is a skill. Some people are born with it innately. Not everybody is. And the other thing is, and I would encourage our collective jobs, fire, EMS, PD, to promote higher education, because what they're looking for now is that piece of paper. But don't only get the piece of paper to have the paper. Find the right degree program for you. Find the right degree that's going to help you promote up and out, or maybe have that second career. I remember a time where a lot of FDNY guys were nurses, and they had the term male nurse at the time. One of my closest friends, Richie Rotans, he's a captain. He was a captain in safety, and he was on Rescue 2 back in the day. He was a nurse. When you work 88 shifts a year, you could do stuff like that. But 24-hour shifts. But you have to have the training to do it. So seek out the education and leadership and education.
Love it. Richie Rotans is actually coming on the show September 29th. And the reason I was able to connect with Richie and give him a call is because of your episode with him. So when I mentioned that I knew you, he's like, he played it off. He's like, nah, he's not my friend. Then he was joking with me, clearly. He's like, I've known Steve a long time. And he actually knows quite a few of the guys I've interviewed for Best of the Bravest previously. So Richie Rotans will be on the 29th.
Yeah, we go back to the 80s.
Yeah. Yep. Good guy. And again, solid career, varied career. But the guys that I've spoken to on the FDNY side that work with him have nothing but good things to say. So that's
he went from firefighter to deputy commissioner to commissioner of OEM in Nassau County, deputy commissioner in New York City. So he definitely had succeeded nicely.
Oh yeah, for sure. I linked in the description of this video. I linked your website. I linked 5 Minutes to Chaos as well, and of course, I put in your LinkedIn on top of that. So besides those things, and like I said, please, for the audience out there, check out 5 Minutes to Chaos. You won't be sorry you did, and check out Steve's website too. Besides those things, any other shout outs to anyone or anything that you want to give?
You need to get a shout out, because I said I promised you I'd say this. Your show, your video podcast is what you are developing here is an oral history of public safety and emergency service in New York City. And I don't mean ESU. I mean all of us collectively, emergency services, ESU included. We're all part of the red, white, and orange family. I'm still an orange and white guy, but your episodes are putting a historical record together of what it was like in our time. And I hope, like my podcast, your podcast will be an opportunity for growth for others that are seeking to get in the business, get careers, and then grow within them.
Oh, well, that means a lot. Anytime I get those compliments from you guys that were out in the field doing this kind of work during that time frame, it certainly means a lot. Like I joked about off the air, it's a labor of love, but I don't put an emphasis on the labor part. I put an emphasis on the love part, and I always hope to do a good show for you guys that are nice enough to give me the time, and you guys in the audience that are always nice enough to tune in. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, great job, Mike. And I was so thrilled when you invited me to be on it. I mean, after I heard some of the people that you've had in this, I mean, yeah. And the other thing is, it's not all about the brass. I mean, you got police officers, firefighters, and then you got some of the brass on. You had Niagara on, Danny, and I mean, it's great stuff. Good stuff.
Mix.
Thanks, Mike.
Oh, thank you. This was wonderful. Stick around. We're saying our goodbyes off the air. And thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. And again, just briefly, please take a second to remember Jerry Howard, who passed away today, as Deputy Chief Kuhr mentioned at the top, a legend truly in the New York City emergency management community, who will not be forgotten by those who knew him and those who knew of him. So coming up Monday, this was a pre-recorded interview, so it's not live. I recorded it earlier. You'll get it Monday at 7. And that is former LAPD Boston and two-time NYPD commissioner, also former chief of the New York City Transit Police, Bill Bratton. Episode will air on Monday. And that was about 30, almost 40 minutes or so. And that was good. His camera froze, but his audio was crystal clear. So you'll still get a good story out of him throughout. And that was a fun conversation about a myriad of different topics. Tuesday, it's not confirmed yet. And there's a plan B if she can't. But we mix it up on the show, as you know. So even though it's 80% first responders, every now and then we do news interviews and sports interviews. Amy Freeze, former longtime veteran of Channel 7 WABC and currently on Fox Weather, may in all likelihood join the program. But if not, former NYPD detective from the Joint Terrorism Task Force will take over, and that'll be the plan B. So we'll see how Tuesday shakes out. But Monday, be on the lookout for Bill Bratton's interview dropping at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the meantime, this has been volume 41 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. And on behalf of retired New York City EMS and FDNY Deputy Chief Steve Kuhr, I'm Mike Colón. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time. Take care.